is Douglas Bloch. I'm an author and depression survivor. Welcome to your Depression Recovery channel, where each week we talk about practical tools and coping strategies for healing from depression and anxiety. Back in 2012, this channel began by my sharing my story of recovery from a life-threatening depressive illness. Since then, I've started a feature called Back to the Brink, where I invite other people to share their stories of depression and recovery. This week, we're going to have a person named Steve talk to us about his experience in depression and how he got better. Well, welcome, Steve. It's really good that you took time out of your busy schedule to come here and talk to the audience. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me.
The way I always start these interviews is by asking the kind of the obvious question, which is, what is your exact diagnosis and how did you first receive it?
So the first time I was depressed came in the middle 1990s while I was at work, and we were going through a really turbulent period of change, and I started to notice that I was not sleeping well and was having big kind of mood swings up and down and feeling anxious, and I finally decided that I needed medication, which was a big decision, and I asked my doctor to see a psychiatrist who said, "Oh, clearly you are depressed."
So was there a resistance in your taking medication? Because people in my group have told me, no, I don't want to take medication. It's a stigma. Besides, I should be strong enough to beat this on my own, and I don't want to be dependent on anything. And so, these kinds of beliefs come up, and people often put off taking medication or sometimes don't take it at all. So did any of those things go through your mind?
Yeah, they certainly did. And up until then, I had always sort of been able to deal with things on my own. But I finally got to a point where it was clear to me that I wasn't able to deal with it on my own. And I didn't really care what stigma there was. I just didn't want to live that way.
So your pain was great enough that you said, okay, I may have these considerations, but I don't want to live like this anymore. I need to get some help, and that's what you did. After you gave in and said, yes, I do need help, you went to see a psychiatrist, right?
I went and saw a psychiatrist, and he said that getting the right medication was kind of an art, not a science.
Trial and error.
Trial and error. We have to experiment a little bit and see. And I think he put me on Zoloft, and in about 3 weeks I noticed that it kind of gave me a bottom, so that when I would go down, instead of keeping going down,
oh, I see.
I would sort of bounce along.
Okay, you didn't hit bottom, it gave you a bottom.
It gave me a bottom.
You get like a safety net.
A safety net.
Right, so you didn't crash on the floor, you only went down so far.
Well, only went down so far.
And then you could bounce back up.
And then I could bounce back up and be relatively normal. And I could be normal.
So it worked for you on the first try. I mean, the first medication you took.
No, it did. It did.
You're very lucky. Sometimes people go through 6, 7, 8, 9 trials, and it takes months for them to get some relief. So you were very fortunate.
I think I really was, and then later I asked him, after I sort of stabilized and the work situation changed and I sort of got back to normal, I said, well, what could I do if I wanted to go off the medication? And he said, well, you could, sort of alternate days for a couple weeks, and then eventually you could sort of pull off. But he said, you'll know. He said, if you need to be on the medication, it'll become really clear to you.
Right, you'll start to relapse.
And
so what he said was take Zoloft one day and then skip a day.
I think that's
take one day and skip a day.
I think that's what he said for a period of time.
You were tapering off.
Right, and pay attention to
how you're feeling.
How you're feeling, and
right.
So that's what I did.
I'm doing the same thing on a drug called Abilify.
Oh, okay.
Every other day, then every third day, and so far I haven't noticed any descent, so far so good. So this is something I should have asked right at the beginning after you told me your diagnosis, and this is a critical question to ask everyone, and the answer is always yes, by the way, but is there a history of depression, anxiety, any mood disorder in your family? And usually there is, because depression, like cancer, like heart disease, usually has a genetic component, and it's usually partially inherited?
There was my father's mother, when she was in her 70s, had some electroshock treatments. And actually, my father, in the 1950s, had a work problem, and he got depressed, I guess. Mm-hmm. I was only about 5 or 6, and he saw a psychiatrist, and whatever they did, they worked through it. But we never talked about it.
Mm-hmm. I can see why you never talked about it, because back then in the 50s, when you and I were growing up, you think there's a stigma now against mental illness. Man, oh man, it was all hush up. I had a client in the Wednesday group who was schizophrenic, a woman. She had 5 children, and she was going in and out of the hospital, and she told, they told the children, and she told the children she was going off on brief vacations. They made some sort of cockamamie excuse. Years later, when she was in the group, she finally, came clean and told them, what was really going on as I was having these episodes. And the kids said, well, we kind of knew something was wrong, but no one ever really told us about it. So, kids know when their parents are having problems, but back then, too much shame to really talk about it. So your father and your father's mother.
Yeah.
So it was sort of passed down, and you were do you have any brothers or sisters?
I do, but I don't know that anyone has had depression.
So you were the one who basically got the gene or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. So now that we know about your family history, I want to go back to that first episode where, just to sum up what you said, you had some problems at work, you weren't sleeping, you were symptomatic, you finally kind of broke down and said, I don't want to live like this. You went to your psychiatrist, he gave you Zoloft, and it worked, and eventually you were able to taper off.
Right.
Now, I believe there was a second episode you had, because one of the things I've been trying to tell the viewers out there is that depression and healing from depression is not a one-time event. Because depression is a chronic relapsing disorder, and if people have one episode, oftentimes they have a second or even a third. So I believe you did have a second episode?
Right, so that was about 5 years later, about 2000, 2001, where I lost my job after a period of crisis at work, and I was really, I got really depressed because it was like having my identity ripped away from me. And we lived in San Francisco, and I worked in Silicon Valley, and we sort of had to figure out where to go and what to do, and because it was during the tech bust of 2000 and 2001. So we decided to move to Portland, and
good move.
Right, it was a good move. And when we moved here, I saw an article about you in the Hollywood Star, and about your Healing from Depression group, and about your book. And so I decided to call, and I started to go to the group.
That's how you found out about the group. You moved to Portland, you're starting to come here, and we'll talk later about how the group helped you. But did you also go back to another psychiatrist and try some more medication? Or?
Right. I went to, my healthcare was coming through the county, and so I went to the county, and they gave me medication. They also did suicide tests. They gave me suicide tests, which I thought were really interesting, and really, in some ways, I thought they were kind of appropriate. I mean, it wasn't that I ever took action, but I could sort of see the point of the questions they were asking.
Did you have suicidal thoughts every now and then?
Yeah, every now and then I would have thoughts, but I never sort of
never had a plan.
Carried out a plan.
But you were in enough pain that you thought about that sometimes.
Yeah, and so they gave me medication, and I think that might have been Wellbutrin at that time. They may have put me on Wellbutrin.
So that was your second antidepressant.
Yeah, the second one. And that helped.
So once again, you were lucky on the first try.
Yeah. I've been sort of receptive to the medication.
Right. Well, some people like myself are treatment resistant to medication, and so that's a whole other story. But Wellbutrin helped, and he started coming to my group.
I came to the group, and one of the things that really struck me about the group and your book was how it talked about it being a multifaceted, holistic approach where you had to deal with all different aspects. You had to deal with medication and nutrition and physical activity and social activity,
Spiritual activity.
right. And in a way, I responded to that. So I started to go to Al-Anon groups that were 12-step groups, and I saw a homeopathist that had some tinctures
Right, for that.
for depression, and I had my medication, and I had the Healing from Depression group, and we had a business that brought me into contact with a lot of people, so
Right.
I had a certain amount of social interaction going, and actually I think at that time I got a personal trainer at the gym. And
That was good.
That was good. And I also started to do Kundalini yoga meditation, and that over time clicked in. So over about a 2-year period, I just kept doing
Multiple things.
and there was a gradual. And I had a therapist. I also had a therapist. So there was a gradual movement.
But you've said one of the key elements of your healing was being in the group.
Right.
In terms of being with other people who you could talk openly with, people who shared your condition, having a sense of belonging and connection.
And you could hear their experience.
Right.
Because otherwise, I never knew people that were really feeling severely depressed, or I never really talked to them about their experience. And it was really good to do that.
To see you were not the only one.
I'm not the only. I wasn't alone. I'm not the only one. It's like I'm not, just crazy for
Right.
having these feelings at
Right.
all. And
They're actually quite common.
yeah,
When you look at the statistics, 1 in every 2 people in the United States has had a mental health diagnosis in the course of a lifetime. That means half of the Americans have some sort of mental illness, over the course of their lifetime. So it's not a rare thing. So the group was one of the factors that helped you.
yes, definitely. And it helped organize the other things.
Right, because we talked about those strategies. It was
Right.
sort of your place you could come and not only connect but also learn and
Right.
kind of organize your whole recovery program.
Right, and then you also had this thing about having a vision statement where you'd
Oh,
say,
yeah, that's right.
I'll know I'm something when blah. And you had this I had this very
No, it
detailed
wasn't blah.
description.
You said
It
basically-
wasn't blah.
It
but
was basically
a very specific description.
recovery means to be, waking up and feeling
Feeling
energetic,
good and going through the day and having this
having a good
happen.
relationship
Yeah,
with my
right.
partner and smiling and basically making jokes or whatever it was. But you had a template
Right.
that could guide you towards the goal of feeling better. And it was very detailed and specific.
Right. And I could read it, I could change it, and I could read it in the morning when I got up and remind myself.
Right.
And I like that.
Right. Well, I have a whole video called Setting the Intention to Heal, and I found that people who come to my group who have a clear vision of recovery get better, at a much higher rate than people who just are more kind of stumbling along. It's really important at the beginning of recovery that you have a clear picture of your outcome, even if you don't think you can get to it, even if you're pessimistic. The picture of the outcome is half the battle, and you did that quite well. I remember you really got in there, did your vision statement, and you started to repeat it.
Yeah.
Or read it, so to speak,
Yeah.
every day. So that was your second experience of depression, losing your job, moving up to Oregon, finding this group, getting into counseling and taking meds in 2002. And I believe you told me that within 2 years, 2004, you were starting to feel better.
Yeah.
And have you had any episodes since then?
Nothing more than like 2 or 3 days. Nothing that went even a week.
Right.
Where I noticed it enough where there had been individual days where I was like, it reminds me of what I felt, and I was like, I don't like this.
But they were passing.
But they were passing. They didn't last.
For you to have a clinical depression diagnosis, they have to be going on for 2 weeks or more.
Right.
And you weren't even close.
Right.
So you really haven't experienced any true depression since 2004.
Right.
Which is going on 12 years, or is 12 years.
Right.
So that's pretty remarkable. So what are the things you've been doing for the past 12 years that have maintained your recovery? And if you start to slip, if you start noticing yourself, sleep is a big one, problems in eating, feeling down, if you start noticing yourself going into a depression, do you have a relapse prevention plan? So the two questions are, what have you been doing and what are you doing to maintain your wellness? And two, if that wellness slipped, what would be, do you have a plan of how you would respond?
I take a low dose of Celexa and for depression, and a low dose of Buspar for anxiety. I'm a little reluctant to go off them. I don't know if it would make a difference or not, but since I have it prescribed, I just sort of do that.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, if it's not broke, don't, yeah, no. And then I have the Kundalini Yoga meditation that I do. And then also in the last 5 years or so, 5 or 6 years, my husband and I have studied a program called Nonviolent Communication.
Oh, yeah.
Which is about empathetic listening and compassionate communication. And it really has helped our relationship a lot, which is also has an impact on my overall well-being. So by helping our relationship, it's kept things more peaceful and gets issues resolved faster.
And since stress is the major depression of relapse, by taking some of the stress out of your relationship, it's been helpful in maintaining your recovery.
Right. So those are all things that I do now. And if I were to run into more problems, I definitely would have my meds reevaluated. And then I might go back to a 12-step program.
Or maybe even my group.
Or maybe your group.
If it got bad enough, right?
Yeah.
If you really were desperate, then you come see Doug, right?
Really? I really.
Right. So, you've been through 2 depressions, you've been through kind of a maintenance program. So what have you learned through over the last 20 years as you've dealt with, and you had some anxiety too, right? Which we didn't really talk about.
Yeah.
So as you battled or dealt with these issues, usually I find when people go through a certain amount of suffering or ordeal, they come out with some sort of knowledge, wisdom, or some sort of learning.
Well, I certainly am a different person. I'm certainly a more spiritual person than I was. And I have a deeper kind of understanding of myself from having experienced all this range of feelings, and more compassion for other people.
Right, who are suffering.
Who are going through this, because you know it's real and it's not something you just can do all by yourself.
No, it's hell, and it's tough for people to be going through this.
It's really hard.
So you've kind of broadened your circle of compassion to feel connected to other people you wouldn't have felt connected to, fellow sufferers.
Yeah.
So in some ways, it's made you a more compassionate and a more encompassing person.
Yeah,
suffering often does that.
Yes.
Breaks down the barriers between us and the world and softens us in a way. So
yeah, like Buddha said.
The Buddha said, right, exactly. So a certain amount of pain is good for us, right? Builds character. That's what my parents used to say.
Doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger,
right? Good old Nietzsche, right? So you've learned some things, and you're still here, and you're doing well. So is there any message you would finally, like to leave the audience in terms of anything you can impart to them that might help them, deal with any episodes of depression they're experiencing now, or something that might come up in the future?
To try several things. That this idea of dealing with depression in all its various aspects in different areas of your life is important. Don't give up, and try to notice small improvements as you progress, because it doesn't happen always fast, and it doesn't happen all at once. But when you can see improvement, it really makes a big difference.
I really like what you said about never give up.
Yeah.
This 9-month episode I came out of recently, one of my friends said you were determined not to give up. And of course, it's easy to give up because, depression can be overwhelming and it can feel hopeless and you're never going to get better. But, I tell my clients and viewers, you just have to find a way to hang in there one day at a time, maybe 1 hour, one breath, because eventually the law of the universe is things change.
Yep.
And they do. And if we wait long enough, they will change for the better, because depression is treatable. It's not terminal, and and things eventually turn around if we can just hang in there. So, and that's what happened with you. You stuck with it. You were patient. Took you 2 years the first time. Maybe it took you 2 years the second time to get better. I don't know how many years it took you the first time. Maybe it was shorter.
Yeah, it was short.
But 2 years is still a long time to get over an illness.
Yeah.
Usually we have an infection, we go to the doctor, we take 10 days of antibiotics, we're done.
Right.
This is something that's much slower to recover from. So we have to be patient, like you said, notice the small changes, and just know eventually we're going to get better. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for volunteering your time to come here. And
I wanted to pay back.
yes, yeah, well, hopefully your friends and family will watch this and say, "Yay, Steve."
And pay it forward.
Right, exactly. This has been Douglas Bloch. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something from it. If you want to give me some feedback, you can leave your comments in the comments section, or you can email me, as many of you do, at douglasbloch@gmail.com. And if you want to learn more about this work, you can visit my website, healingfromdepression.com. You can subscribe to this channel, or you can simply click on the links in the closing credits. And until we meet again, I wish you the best in your mental health recovery. Thank you for watching.